All right. Good morning, everybody. Look at those early birds, like participant numbers up, 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 up. Good morning, everybody, and happy Tuesday to all of you. We've got a really incredible session today, one that I always look forward to in the context of our beverage conference. It's usually the kickoff session, but being virtual, it probably is not quite as impactful as it is if it were live. So we just sort of folded it in based on people's schedules and all that other good stuff. But it is a very, very global program today, as the title suggests, Unexpected Gems from Around the World. So no matter where you are logging in from, where you are joining us in Zoom land, it may or may not be in a place that a wine is from. I guess that would be the best way of stating it. I hope things are well in your part of the world. I hope the weather is cooperating in these crazy times in which we live. Fall is officially here in the Bay Area, and I actually have a coat on today because I'm not quite ready to turn the heat on in my house yet, but nevertheless, it's not warm enough to just wear a t-shirt or something like that. So I'm there. Hopefully it's warmer where you are. Many of you are veterans of not only Zoom, but obviously of our conference. So please use your chat for chatting. Please use your Q&A for questions. We'll jump in and reiterate all of that as we move through. But we're extremely excited to have an amazing group of people who will be joining us today, both out there in the participant land, but also from with our Vintner colleagues who are there as we go through this really cool and really amazing thing. So I'm going to give everybody maybe just another 30 seconds to let a few more people join, and then I will kick off with that always wonderful and highly anticipated element of conferences called housekeeping, and we will start there. But if you are here for Unexpected Gems from Around the World, you are in the right place, joining Sara and myself. Sara, by the way, thank you for your participation today, and thank you for your incredible expertise and value add to our own conference at the end of last week.
Oh, my great pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me, Evan.
It was my pleasure. It was my pleasure. All right, that's going to be my my sign. That is my catalyst to kick off this show. And let's begin with our, of course, it's locked on me. This is what I don't like about these things. There we go, with our housekeeping. Sometimes you just have to hit it a few times. Needless to say, open up pour your wines out if you've not done so already. The wines are in these lovely, and for those of you who are friends of Master the World, new packaging, new bottles, which actually, when you pour out of the uniform green glass, the appearance, the visuals of the wine are even more dramatic than they were in the past. But get them out there and get them poured. This is kit 2, gosh, what number are we on? 240C. Make sure that you pour them there. And if you're participating in online, that would be the kit code that you do. This is actually the only blind tasting of the entire session. So if you really want to get the full value of this program, taste the wines blind. That's easy to be done because, of course, they all have Master the World on the front label. And currently, they all show Master the World on the back label with this little peel and reveal thing. However, if you peel that tag off, it's going to reveal what the wine is, and you're going to see all the information. This is a representative wine. This is used earlier. This is not in the kit, but you'll be able to see what the identity is. And I would encourage you, if you're game, to not do that. I'd encourage you to let the wines speak to you as we discuss them blind and learn about them later. Spoiler alert, Sara, unfortunately, much to our collective chagrin, will be leaving us just a touch early after wine number 3 today, which is a bummer, which means because you're just stuck with me for the entire duration. And of course, our participating winemaker friends, but she's got a prior engagement long before our conference that she had to attend. So she will be leaving us. Basics Q&A will be answered either live or in discussion during our Q&A period or emailed afterwards, depending on the nature of it. But please do ask questions. The chat box, as many of you know, is for hellos, hugs, comments, etc.
Reunions, apparently.
Reunions, absolutely. Karaoke planning dates, all that other fun stuff. So please select everyone if you want it to be able to be seen and responded to by everyone. The default is panel only, and we're you want to contact more people than us. As always, the recording of this session will become available tomorrow by the bit.ly link noted in the overview document, and you will be sent with the email. That will also have the tech sheet ability. Obviously, if we gave you ability to see the tech sheets before the blind tasting, well, it's no longer a blind tasting, and we wouldn't want that. So there's a little bit of obtuseness there to do so. And please, please, please complete your feedback, as it's really critical for all of our participants, sponsors, et cetera, but also, you know, wines, particularly the wines in this session, which are not going to be found in many places. If you're interested in receiving more information and perhaps purchasing them, that survey with "I'm interested" is going to be on that bit.ly link. So please do so. And then I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. You guys know how to do this at this point in time, but suffice it to say, we do have an online tool that accompanies the tasting. So if you really want to get not only full information on the wines by revealing their profiles, as it says on that bottom bullet, or participating competitively in your leaderboard by people who are doing this all blind, et cetera, feel free to do so. And you get a little sample of what not only the different interfaces are if you choose to engage with our online evaluation tool. Kind of like Peloton, you can make it hard, you can make it medium, you can make it easy, do whatever you want, and then a sample of a reveal sheet afterwards. Okay, so with that said, let's hop on in and let's talk a little bit about the world and the world of wine before we actually get into this. So I thought it would be intriguing to start off with where the US sits in the grand scheme of things, because we all know various pieces of information of data, and I'm going to throw you a data dump in a minute, but I thought it would just be appropriate to share with you that from the outside looking in, or the inside looking out, as we look at the world as an entirety, the US is still considered to be, as it was last year, the #1 most attractive wine market in the world. Now, this Global Compass report is an annual study that comes out that measures key economic and wine market factors, ranking the attractiveness of wine in the top 50 markets in the world. So what's interesting to note, you know, perhaps beyond the fact that the US is the #1 market for reasons that I'll show you in a moment, but markets change, markets are fluid, and how markets are perceived by our colleagues around the world can rate based on their own series of how they're viscerally feeling a market is. So for example, Korea is now considered the second most attractive wine market in the world. And they were #10 last year. So obviously various things have contributed to that. UK, Ireland, Germany's always been a strong market. Other upwards movement we've seen have been in markets such as Brazil, Poland, Romania, and Singapore. But interestingly, for various reasons, China, which was just last year the world's #4, has fallen to #17 in terms of being an attractive wine market. Now, I apologize in advance for the eyesore here, but at least it's an attractive eyesore. And what I did is I circled the United States in the context of it, because if you connect the dots here via this, it will validate or amplify for you why the US is the top of that list. So interestingly, column #1, we make a ton of wine. We are the 4th largest producer in the world and have been. These numbers, particularly as you get below 4 or below 6 or whatever, vary a little bit based on harvest conditions. So the numbers, for example, in 2019 were different based on the quality and the quantity of harvest in different parts of the world. We also have a lot of acreage under vine. We're the 6th largest there, which makes sense because we're the 4th largest producer. Probably for the #1 reason that we're the biggest market in the world is our consumption. We by far and away consume more wine than anybody, and that's on a volumetric standpoint, because you can see on the per capita, we don't even make the top 10 list. And you know, we're climbing, you know, we're better than we used to be. At one point, I believe we were #61. Now I think we're in the top 20, but you know, we fall far behind people like Portugal and the French and the Italians, who drink a ton of wine. We actually export a fair amount of wine, which a lot of people don't think about. Certainly in your part of the world, Sara, you're well aware of that. And in other countries, they do that too. But again, along with those consumption numbers being high, the fact that we import so much wine is probably what makes us a critically important market for so many people. And the value of that is so high. Now, I want to just take a moment to sort of have you marinate on the fact that we still led in imports last year in value, despite the fact that we had all of those tariffs imposed on wines coming in from various different countries. So even with that, and that's probably why in 2021 we're still the big dog in terms of market. So let's take a look a little bit more in detail of those imports. And I thought it would be fun to show you how the countries broke down, now 18 years ago versus 15 years ago, and show you that, certain elements haven't changed so much. Italy is still a very, very important player. A lot of that, as we know, is not necessarily Barolo and Chianti Classico and Brunello di Montalcino, but the engines of things like Prosecco or the engines of things like Pinot Grigio will help drive and keep those markets up. France is bigger than it used to be. In large part, a lot of that can be attributed to the Provençal rosé market, but not necessarily all of it. Australia's dropped a couple of clicks down as they have sort of retrenched to go for a higher profit, lower volume model over the years. But interesting to look at places like New Zealand, which were barely a blip on the screen in 2003, have exponentially grown a lot. Markets like Argentina have made their presence better known. Markets like Spain, even better known, even though it falls a little bit on the chart. And even our others, 5.4, important to know in the context of the tasting that we're having today as Americans have become increasingly more curious wine drinkers over time. But looking back at the way, quote unquote, things used to be, I thought it would also be fun to look at where things have gone. So this goes back just a few years, but look at what the #1 wines imported into the United States were at the time. And it's interesting to note that back in 1981, and for those of you who are old enough to remember, like I am, Riuniti on ice, Riuniti tastes nice, Chillicella, No Bolo without Frank Sinatra, that there, Mattius Rosé, Blue Nun, all of those big players, many of which have still relevantly kept themselves in the market, were big players then. A lot of them have obviously fallen off, but we've changed as the market has changed a lot. So with that said, I want there's other ways of slicing and dicing this. Sara, why don't you take us through a couple of other ways we can think about this?
Yeah, great. So that was some very relevant information for those of you who are writing or for those of you who are studying, to be able to see those types of breakdowns, really curious way. So what we have here now, some more numbers for you, but I love this visual here. This is brought to us by Wine Folly here. This is the OIV, the International Organization of Vine and Wine here, which tracks more than 10,000 variety. And interestingly here, notes that 13 grapes make up more than a third of the plantings globally, while the top 33 varieties make up more than half of the vineyards. So I think that's a fascinating way to look at it. We're still really, really stuck on certain noble varieties, but if you look here at varieties like Eren here, which is Spain's most widely, one of Spain's most widely planted grape varieties, really primarily used for brandy, you can see how important that is in the context of the grapes grown globally here. So I'd love to see this here. We've got a large circle here on others, and we're gonna see shortly some of those other varieties, in particular indigenous varieties, which make up significant plantings within individual countries. But you still have the big ones: Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, up there, Chardonnay, who make up a lot of international plantings. So if we can move on to the next slide there, Evan, right? So now another way of looking at this, and I love looking at this in terms of leaps and bounds here. We've got three different dates here. So 2000, 2010, and 2016. So we've got a 10-year gap and then a 6-year gap, just so that you understand, right? It's not the same amount of gap times in this diagram here, looking at how these varieties have increased or decreased in plantings over the years. So our Eren here is fastly jumping down here with difference in favoritism for what drinkers are buying, a lot perhaps less fortified brandied styles and and into more table wines. So we're seeing that on the decrease. Varieties here like Cabernet Sauvignon still on the rise, Merlot still strong after a considerable amount of time, after 16 years. In order to further elaborate on this document, in fact, 1% of the grape varieties, so that's actually makes up 12% of grape varieties out of the 1,100 varieties of cultivated wine grapes, and that's measured in the study. They occupy around 45% of the vineyards in the world, right? Okay, so let's have a look at how diverse the grape varieties are planted in certain countries. So you can see here that the two larger producing countries show really important amount of varieties here, Italy and Portugal, up in the 80 varieties representing 75% of the planted area. So looking at a lot of indigenous varieties there making up this kind of cornucopia of vineyard plantings around the world. But USA doing not too badly, and Chile too. So you can see that these are countries showing a lot of diversity in their plantings.
I think it's really interesting because probably a lot of people, again, bringing us back to the United States here with our focus on the globe is today, is that a lot of people probably wouldn't think that United States would be in the top 5 for, having the greatest diversity of grapes representing 75%.
Yep.
But I think it's also interesting to note that, countries that are big producers, like China or Australia or New Zealand actually have relatively less diversity. Ergo, a handful of grapes dominating the landscape of actually what's planted there versus some others. So interesting to see that. Again, I think prismatically as we look across the countries, it's a different thing. So with that all in mind, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing. So we've called this session Unexpected Gems for 2 reasons today. Number one, unexpected. So the unexpected today could be the geography or provenance. It could be not an unusual or not a usual suspect grape. So a grape that didn't make Sarah's top 10 or top 15 list earlier. It could be something that's overlooked, but contextually very prominent today. It might be not on your current radar, but it could be soon. So there's all of that sort of fulfills this element of what we call unexpected. And a gem, of course, means lots of different things. It could be an absolutely exquisite rendition of the above. It could be something that's really emotionally connective, an old friend, if you will, a benchmark iteration, or a wine that when you place the value, the grape, et cetera, all of that, everything works together. I will give you a buzzkill today as you're probably running in your head of all the possible things that we might be having today. Sorry, there is no Solaris-based wines from Norway. I've been reading a lot more about that recently. There's no Koshu from Japan's Yamanashi district. I know a couple of you probably thought that might be in some of the grapes.
Maybe next year.
Maybe next year, you never know. It's always unexpected, but we've got a lot. So the format that we're going to be following is this. For wines 1 through 3 specifically, I will back and forth, but we're going to taste all of the wines blind. So that is to say, we're going to taste the wines and talk about them. Sarah and myself back and forth on wines 1 through 3. We will then reveal the location, the provenance of the wine, what the wine is, and then if a winemaker is with us, they will join us live, or in one case by video, and I will sort of drive 4 through 6, which I kind of have to do, Sarah, because you're not going to be with us. But wines 1 through 3, Sarah will drive, and we'll do that. But once again, particularly on wines 1 through 3, we're going to back and forth. So on that, let's jump into glass number 1. And Sarah, I've got mine, you've got yours. What are you noting as you look at this wine, as you smell this wine, and then ultimately as you taste this wine?
Yeah, this is great. So, as you mentioned, some of these wines are quite representative of the variety, but, there's something about them that is quite unique. And it's for all of you who are studying for tasting exams right now or a blind tasting. This is a great way to start. So one of the things that I notice here is some viscosity, not too much, but enough viscosity here, both, in the glass and when I was tasting it earlier on the palate. And I actually feel like this is a wine that shouldn't be too cold because it really, really blossomed about about 20 minutes after I had it in the glass, it became much more aromatic. It certainly is an aromatic variety, right?
Yeah, it's very expressive, and I thank you for reiterating, Sarah, that everybody, the more air these wines get, the better. They're going to probably start hitting their apex in about 45 minutes. So people at wines 5 and 6 are going to be very happy. But it's a very, there's some density to the wine in terms of its richness, its texture. It is very perfumed, I think, to your point, and the nature of the fruit, which at least for me is showing very stone fruit today, maybe an undercurrent of tropicality there, but primarily stone fruits. Very, very strong, very expressive, very ripe. I might add, but having that tension of still having good structure, nice acidity, a lot of freshness and brightness on it.
I'm actually quite surprised by that dichotomy of richness and brightness in this wine, which I think is really key. In terms of the flavor profile here, you're right, stone fruit, and building upon that also is honeysuckle element, which is really pervasive and lingering on the finish. I really appreciate the length on this wine because it's where it's kind of thinning out the flavors, and I'm able to taste a little bit more because they're, you know, there's a nice powerful wave on the palate, but there's a certain amount of youthfulness, but I'm actually noticing some tertiary elements in this wine too. So, you know, I'm thinking for sure that there's some bottle aged character that's being exhibited.
And the color validates that, although as we know from blind tasting, don't prejudge early. That color could be skin contact, that color could be oak, right. That color could be age, it could be a number of different things. But I concur with you that there is a sort of slightly, you know, beginning to develop that secondary bottle bouquet, a little bit of the nuttiness in a white wine that you would expect. But I'm enamored by the texture of the wine, the roundness, yes. The creaminess in the mouth. And I bet you people out there would probably like to know, all right, Evan, all right, Sarah.
Well, I'd love to, yeah. And I'm seeing some guesses come in here that are really good, that are coming in.
We like that. I'm capable of actually doing this at the same time. So I'm gonna free fall and just go with my gut and the iteration back and forth, but I'm glad people are engaging. I'm glad that people are participating. And I think at this point in time, we should probably just let people know where the wine is from. Give them a clue. And the wine is from Australia. It's from down under, and the wine specifically, everybody, is a Viognier, but a Viognier from Eden Valley, and one of the top wine Viogniers they make, and they make a bunch of them right. From Yalumba Winery.
And I love the fact, you know, that Yalumba are certainly real champions of Viognier. Remember, this is a variety that almost went extinct in the 1960s. And you can really attribute some of that savior aspect of Viognier to the Aussies. You know, it's interesting little history. It made it actually into Australia in 1968 from Montpellier into a research station that Yalumba found these vines. I think there were only like a handful of them, and propagated them before planting them in their Eden Valley vineyard. So there was some foresight here in this particular planting. It's a relatively new variety, even for Australia.
It's extraordinary to me, you know, as that bullet says, that, you know, as recently as 1980, there were fewer than 15 hectares of Viognier left in Condrieu. I mean, this is really something we take for granted, and we just think Viognier is ubiquitous, but it almost fell off the endangered species list there not so long ago. And Louisa, of course, Louisa Rose, who makes this wine, is known as the Queen of Viognier. Here's a couple of shots of some of them. Just beautiful stuff.
It is, and it really is. And this is a variety, you know, it does surprise me that there were so few in Condrieu. I mean, I have seen and I know it, and man, it's a really hard place to grow grapes in general with these single staked vines. And of course, as you can see here, this is not quite a Condrieu style planting here. Here you've got trellised wires here. It looks like you've got some vertical shoot positioning in some of these here, but certainly a wine that takes on a very different expression than that of Condrieu. And even Condrieu, I mean, there isn't that much planted. There is this controversial element, right, of producing wines that are a little bit thicker and richer, more unctuous, more oily, versus those that have a little bit more freshness and a little bit less weight. So I think that this falls kind of neatly in the middle of those two styles.
Yeah, and I think for those of you who are probably, again, I can't follow the chat, I'm not that smart, but for those of you who are picking up Viognier, I mean, it's obviously varietally correct in that regard, and there is something sort of different about it. It's clearly a new world, but at the same time, it's not sort of like a classic California example or something like that. So should we hear from Louise? Let's see what she has to say about it. She can't be here with us, so she's here on screen.
Hello, my name's Louisa Rose, and I'm the chief winemaker here in the beautiful Yalumba winery based in the Barossa in South Australia. Yalumba was founded 6 generations ago in 1849 by Samuel Smith. He was a brewer. He brought his family all the way from Dorset in England to the Barossa here in South Australia. He was a gardener. He was used to growing gardens. He established a vineyard and he started to make wine. And 6 generations later, his family are still living here on the property, still running this beautiful business. The Viognier that I'm going to talk to you today is a really good example of a wine which is quite a new variety for us here in Australia. It only has a history that goes back to 1980, whereas its friends that from its original home in the Rhone Valley, Grenache, Shiraz and Mourvedre, of course, have a very long history here in the Barossa. We have some of the oldest of those grape varieties growing anywhere in the world, pre-phylloxera vines on their own roots. We have this beautiful tradition and we learn a lot from that tradition as winemakers. But we're also very conscious of what we're doing is making wine for a modern world. Our focus of making wines is to make them delicious, to make them something that's going to go beautifully with people's experience. In most cases, that means wines that are going to go particularly well with food. And I can't think of a better wine than Viognier to match with food. In fact, one of the things that I say to people, and I'll extend the same invitation to everybody watching this, is if you can find me a dish, a meal that doesn't go with Viognier, please let me know. Because so far, we've really only found foods right from around the world with any sort of level of spice. They're actually perfect with Viognier. Yalumba, I said, was in the Barossa. We are just in the Eden Valley part of the Barossa, and the Eden Valley is where this Viognier wine is grown. The Eden Valley is the region of the Barossa which is higher in altitude, up to about 1,500, just over 1,500 feet above sea level, compared to the Barossa Valley, which is only about half of that altitude. But what the Eden Valley gives with that altitude is a cooler climate, and that's particularly so at night time. So as the vines ripen their grapes during summer and into the fall period, the flavours ripen during the day. You get this beautiful sort of balance forming in the grapes, and then at night time they have a rest. They cool, the acidity is maintained, the flavours are maintained until they wake up the next morning and the flavours grow again. That's why the Eden Valley is such a perfect region for growing varieties, particularly varieties like Viognier. So once the grapes are ready, and we know when they're ready because I spent all this time walking through the vineyards tasting the grapes, we pick them. And that's when the flavours are created. As winemakers, all we can do now is to maintain those flavours through the winemaking process. We bring the grapes in, we don't add anything, we tip them straight into a press and we press them directly into the vessel they're going to ferment in. Because the yeast that have piggybacked in on those grapes, out of our beautifully biodiverse vineyards, those are the yeasts which are going to do the fermentation. There's lots of different yeast in there. They all work at different times during the fermentation. They all end up creating this beautiful, balanced and complex wine that you see in the glass in front of you. The fermentation usually kicks off after 3 or 4 days. Those yeasts start to divide, and it finishes within 2 to 3 weeks. After that, the wine sits on its lees in our cool rooms. We don't put the wine through malolactic fermentation, but we do leave it on lees with regular batonnage for about 10 months before it's blended and bottled. So I hope you enjoy the 2017 Yalumba Eden Valley Viognier.
Yeah, so she had such really interesting things to say about that wine, Evan. And one of them was that it goes very well with a lot of foods, including spicy foods, which is something that I don't think about with Viognier. But when you're under 14% alcohol, when you try to keep it fresh, then you can, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we forget oftentimes that one of the reasons that we push certain wines away from heat is because not so much the flavors are subtle or whatever, but the alcohol levels are high, and it's literally throwing alcohol onto a fire. So if you start with lower alcohols, you're going to have a much better place to be. So let's move on to wine two. Needless to say, everybody out there, you're welcome to be drinking any of the wines when you want, but to get the full effect, at least re-engage with the wine when you're with us. So Sara, what are you seeing? Obviously, we've got a rosé wine here. Let's spoiler alert to everybody. What are you picking up as you get into the glass here and into the palate with this the wine that we've got?
Well, Evan, I can't help but look at color the first thing when I'm picking up a glass of rosé, and kind of thinking, is this direct press or isn't it? Or the production methods I kind of try to figure out before I even get my nose in the glass. This is certainly a pale style, but it's not as pale as, it's not as pale as can be. So I'm thinking that there's a little bit of maceration that was involved in this particular wine right off the bat. And then on the nose, I love the wealth of summer berry fruit here, and I can't help but notice like this distinctive fruit derived spice, a peppery quality to this wine. So strawberries and pepper are the first things that kind of leap out of the wine to me. What did you think of that aromatic profile?
No, I'm very beguiled by this wine. I mean, there's just so much going on. I mean, I was actually given, and rosé is one of those wines that we do so much prejudgment by looking at it before we smell, before we do anything. By the way, we do that with rosé sparkling wine as well as we do with rosé still wines. But I was sort of taken aback by, there is this explosiveness of fruit character, and it is berry fruit, it is summer fruit that you talked about before, but there is this underturn, this sort of like below the radar thing of spice elements, of actually a slightly savory element in there as well too, some darker characters, more earthy characters to it. But again, there's so much top note, there's so much treble, if this were a musical composition on this wine, that it's hard to overlook it. Incredibly fresh as well.
Incredibly. And the palate, as I might expect here, is quite dry, but wow, there's quite a bit of acidity. I'm salivating at the end of tasting this wine. I really got the salivation glands going here. So dry and quite fresh, very refreshing style of wine, and very clean, which can be a challenge with a lot of rosés, to have all of those things in line. Right, that balance.
No, and I'm loving it, and I think the acidity, to your point, is one of the hallmarks of this wine, and what brings there's still that sort of playful warm weather enjoyment factor that you're going to get, as we called them yesterday in seminars, the porch pounding effect that you get here, but there is a seriousness about it. The acidity, I think, brings that seriousness to even greater attention. There is, and be interesting when we're joined momentarily, but there is a sense of RS, maybe a tiny bit, just at least in the back of my mouth. There's a little bit of tannic grip, which was sort of both a surprise, but also something I enjoy about this wine, which makes me think, again, it's a good gastronomic component there. Exactly. And there's a slightly, dare I say, apricot-y thing or something. There's a little stony fruit element in there in the back. I don't want to go as it's interesting. Part of me is like, is it going the Turkish delight route or whatever? But nevertheless, it's quite interesting. So where do we think we should let everybody know at least where the wine is from first, and then we're going to join it. So spoiler alert, everybody, here we come. And our wine is from Austria. And here we go.
And for those of you who are trying to guess frantically the grape variety, now that you know the country, this is a very widely planted grape variety.
There you go. It is 100% Zweigelt too. And that's pretty, I think a lot of people may have had Austrian rosé before, but one that was pure Zweigelt, that's not necessarily something you see all the time. Why don't you
go ahead?
Yeah. Go ahead,
So
Sara.
actually we've got Jan here. Jan Cooks is going to speak to us about the Pracht Niederösterreich Rosé here. That's, as we said, 100% Zweigelt. Welcome, Jan.
Thank you, Sara. Thank you, Evan. Thanks for having me here on the program. I'm joining you from Switzerland, and I found it kind of funny, you know, like being from with the so first we're in kangaroo land, now we're in no kangaroo land. So I thought that was quite a quirk. Anyway, I'll introduce myself. I've been working together with Stefan now for 14 years. Stefan Pracht. I have a background in winemaking and business development, and Stefan is, I think, probably one of the hottest winemakers in Austria right now. He took over winemaking literally at the age of 14. So he started winemaking and saw that there was a potential for their own company. That was back then split up into 3 different segments. So one was cattle, one was normal agriculture, and the third was a little bit of vines, but still going back like 8 to 9 generations back in the little village. They had a very, very big focus, and so Stefan became more and more was achieving much more awards over time, and then if you could just go to the next. Yeah, so this is probably one of the most fascinating pictures. This is like probably like a huge birthday cake for every wine maker, is what Stefan has on his shovel, which is earth with a high amount of humus. And this is, and just to point out, this wine is organic and it's also certified vegan. So this is a very important issue here. We're talking about a company that has been farming organically since the late 80s. And if you can just go to the next picture, this is a picture that really sums it all up. This is a region to the northeast of Vienna. So it's a fairly flat and windy landscape. It's the flattest part of Austria. So you have about 80% of Austria is covered with mountains, of course, and this part here is, as you can see, rolling hills. But the soils are alluvial from the Ice Age. They were leftovers from the glaciers. And so these are rolling hills with winds coming in predominantly from Ukraine, Russia, and Poland. So it's very continental climate, as which you can see, of course, here with the fact that they have energy windmills planted all over the vineyards. And you have that sensation of a dryness. You dry out very, very quickly. It's a dehydration effect. And so when Stefan's dad, Willy, was still running the property, he decided to go organic because he understood that by using conventional farming, you actually destroy all the agents that are important to develop humus. And humus is the only thing that retains any kind of water in the soil. And so that water is, of course, we can't irrigate. So that water is, of course, important to have a continual growth and a continual photosynthesis for the plants, which is the basis of the entire production. And so coming back to this wine, I think it's my personal house wine. I always have to have 1 or 2 bottles in the fridge.
Understandably.
The story behind this wine was, it started about like 6 years ago. I was working in the market in, I think it was Chicago, and I noticed that there were all these rosés coming on the market from the south of France. So mainly wines with 13.5 volumes %. So I thought to myself, like, that's interesting. And then literally 2 weeks later, I was together with Stefan. We were having a beer, and as they say in kangaroo land, takes a lot of beer to make good wine. So we were having a couple of beers, and he said, well, can we do something with Zweigelt? And now here's the thing, of course. Zweigelt is a variety that's not very high in color. It usually produces fairly light wines. A lot of producers in Niederösterreich have it, and so so I thought, like, wait a minute, hey, what about making a really light rosé with 11.5 volumes percent, very blush, and instead of making a red wine and competing with, you know, big heavy, let's say Argentinians or Spanish wines, but let's make a wine that stands out. Like, of course, it's a no-brainer. You don't want to drink a 13 volumes percent wine on a hot day outside. So you want to have something with 11.5 that just drinks by itself. So I thought let's give it a try, and we've become very successful with it so far, and it's pretty much in all states as far as I know.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
That's
And the
great.
prices, I mean, converting this into Canadian dollars, because I'm in Canada right now, but the price is quite outstanding. I mean, given the competition for dry rosés of this nature, that's a great value.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Jan. All the vintners, again, as a reminder, will be with us during the Q&A period, during the happy part-time, happy half hour, happy whatever we do there. But a neat wine, an unexpected wine, so it clearly hits all of our criteria of being that, and based on its flavor profile, I would also tell you, Jan, it's a gem of a wine.
Thank you.
Keep it as a staple in my refrigerator too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's move on. And I love that picture. Let's move on now to wine number 3. So we're switching gears here, and we're moving clearly into the land of reds. And interestingly enough, if you look across the profile here, this is probably the most deeply colored of the 4 glasses I've got left on my table. So I'm keeping that even before I smell it, even before I do anything there, as I'm trying to get in Evan Goldstein's head about what he would lay out there, how to make this work. So what are you getting in wine? Wow. And very unique nose here for me anyway.
Yeah. So I'm quite excited about this one. I think that this is quite distinctive of the grape variety. And my one hint is that this is a grape variety that it is known. It might not be in the place that you think it is from, but it certainly has some of the characteristics of this variety, which are predominantly red fruit, right? Mm-hmm. It is certainly aromatic, and it has a lot of natural fruit spice to it. I think that there's a little bit of oak, but like a soupçon of oak that's really, really finely integrated into the aromatic characteristics of the nose in this wine.
Yeah, no, I think you're.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say there are some very familiar elements to it, both in terms of the fruit profile. I think you're right, and it is an interesting combination of fruit spice inherent to the variety or varieties, if it happens to be a blend, although it speaks with a fairly monochromatic voice. It comes off to me as a wine that's probably pure as opposed to being a blended style of wine. Obviously, we're in the place where a lot of the world blends their grapes together, but there's also a nice herbal note to it. I think there is a slightly both fresh and slightly dried herb character. There is, I like that word, soupçon of oak underneath, because I'm definitely picking up some elements that would suggest quality oak to me, but done with a deft hand, done in a not so big way. But there is that sort of very underlying character of fruit that, at least off the top of my head, speaks to a particular grape type to me.
And stylistically speaking, this is something that I think really straddles the, forgive me for saying new versus old, maybe modern world versus European stylings. Here, I think that there's definitely a lot of great freshness and acidity. It's a very clean wine, but there's also this kind of ample fruit dominated palate here too, and it's got a lot of polish to the palate. Mm-hmm. Which I really like. The tannins are quite silky. They're non-intrusive here to the overall drinking experience or tasting experience.
Yeah, and I'm enjoying the fact that although that there's there's some volume on the nose, at least in the context of what I think the variety may be speaking to everybody out there. Nevertheless, there's a quietness to the palate on the wine. It's not a pedal to the metal, beat you on the head, tell me what you are thing that you would oftentimes find in parts of the New World where volume is important. There's a subtlety about the wine. There's an elegance. There's a nuance about the wine. I'm enjoying the acidity once again a lot. I'm enjoying sort of a very smooth character to the tannins, and find it a really interesting wine.
Definitely, I do too. I think there's some really great complexity to this. So should we give them a hint? Maybe.
Should we give them a hint? I'm sure people are sort of saying them as, I think I know what this is, and that's cool and all that. But what I think might be surprising for everybody is, even if maybe, again, getting back to a familiar old friend, maybe where this old friend is from is a surprise. I can't tell you how happy I am, and so happy I am for you to ultimately talk to us about this wine, to be featuring a Canadian selection in our lineup today. I have been fighting for years to have one of our northern neighbors participate, but aside from taxes, availabilities, et cetera, it's always been challenging. So once we were able to confirm and lock down this lovely Pinot Noir from the Okanagan up in British Columbia, I was thrilled. And I know you actually were just at this winery recently, were you?
Yes, I was. I was actually judging the National Wine Awards of Canada, which is an annual event. And this year was the largest in Canadian history. We had something like 2,180 wines from across the country. And this year we were judging in British Columbia in the beautiful Okanagan Valley. So I was actually just at Quails Gate itself for an evening. And I have to say, this is, one of my favorite Pinot Noir producers in the area, but it's getting quite competitive, Pinot Noir. So just to situate you, for those of you, and this is actually closer to you, Evan, than me right now. But the Okanagan is actually quite a diverse region, right? In the northern half of the Okanagan Valley wine producing region, this is where Quails Gate is located in West Kelowna area. Here they have a really great diurnal shift and a cool necessary to really produce some great Pinot Noir. For those of you who have been to the Okanagan Valley before, this is actually not that far away from Mission Hill Winery, which I'm sure you've heard of because they do export quite a bit to the US. Not so much Quails Gate, but hey, I'd love to see this exported a little bit more, imported a little bit more. The Okanagan Wine Valley, wasn't really established as a grape growing region until the 70s, although there are plantings that date back to the early 60s, and some of those are from Quails Gate. And a lot of those early plantings, Chasselas and Chenin Blanc were planted there. So there are a couple really early plantings way back in the early 60s. But really, Quails Gate was founded in the late 80s, but they're still, one of the more established wineries in the Okanagan. And they produce some pretty wicked Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. And due to the latitude here, there's a lot of sunshine, a long growing season. It's warmer than you might think that it is. West Kelowna actually sits over an extinct volcano with this rich volcanic rock underlying those vineyards. There's also clay and gravel and glacial till, which is really similar to most of this area in the northern mid Okanagan. And it really gives the wines this kind of this gusto to them. Certainly lots of character. I'm not sure how many people here are familiar with this valley. It runs about 250 kilometers just north of Vernon to the south of Osoyoos on the US border here, which is an extension of the Sonoran Desert. So it's really, really dry in the south and known for its big reds. Syrah here totally stops my heart in the south of the Okanagan, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, but up further north where you see Quails Gate, you're finding a lot more Pinot Noir and aromatic white varieties, and of course, Chardonnay.
it's interesting to me, Sarah, that quietly, an area that we've maybe heard about, some of us, but it's kind of like Horton hears a who. Doesn't everyone knows what's going on in Whoville unless you really pay attention? I mean, there's almost 200 wineries. There's like 175, 180 wineries, and there are 9 distinctive GIs, if you will, in the area, which is probably going to come up on some master sommelier or master of wine exam at some point in time. But I think we're underexposed to the diversity. And also, can you explain, maybe for people who are not familiar, what percentage of the overall Canadian wine industry Okanagan comprises versus, say, Ontario or?
Right. So the Okanagan itself actually comprises about 86% of the province of British Columbia's wine producing area. So it is the hub of wine producing, but there are other regions like Vancouver Island, the Gulf Islands, Fraser Valley, Similkameen Valley, and these other emerging regions that are popping up like the Kootenays and Lillooet and Thompson Valley. But in Canada, it's actually even a smaller percentage. Although there are actually more physical wineries in British Columbia, the volume is significantly smaller than what you'd see in Niagara. So it's somewhere, and it changes, but it's somewhere in the realm of about 30% of the wine that's produced in Canada is coming from British Columbia, and most of that is coming from the Okanagan Valley. So it's a lot of boutique wineries, a lot of small artisanal production within the Okanagan Valley. And this is actually, this winery here is a 3rd generation, which is pretty significant when we're talking about New World wine regions, especially the Okanagan. The Stewart family who owns Quails Gate is a 3rd generation Okanagan wine family, and they farm more than 200 acres. I'm not going to say hectares for those doing a US presentation. I had to transcribe that, but 200 acres of vineyards. And they've been grape growers for quite some time now, so as I said, since the 60s at least.
Yeah, it's interesting. And before we lose you and before we move on to the next one, I think it's encouraging for people to come back to this one if you haven't smelled it in a few minutes. It's really opening up nicely, and it has that sort of interesting complement of berry fruit, of herbalness. There are elements of it that actually remind me a bit, not completely, I mean, a bit of something that's kind of Otago, but also kind of Sonoma Coast at the same time, and yet it's its own thing. It's really a treat to be able to have it. I think it fits all the criteria of being an unexpected gem in that sense. And like I said, I am just absolutely tickled pink that we have Canadian participation in our conference this year, and presented by a Canadian person, no less, much more credibility than myself. We're going to jump into the 4th one. I know you've got to leave us momentarily. Do you want to taste the next wine with me before we?
I would love to taste. I've got another 5 minutes, so I'm going to taste the next
wine. Okay, great. So let's move on to wine number 4. And wine number 4, I think what's striking to me as you look across 4, 5, and 6 after 3 is that they all don't even have quite as much, at least in my glasses today, in my light, pigmentation as we see in some of the others. So while you're smelling and going in here, because I know I caught you off guard, probably weren't expecting to do this.
No,
my own notes, I wrote down my notes because I thought I was going to run solo here, is that it's sort of a nice bright to day bright sort of character and color, sort of medium cherry red, a little bit of pink towards the rim. And in the nose, there's this wonderful sort of youthful exuberance. It's clearly a red fruited wine, plums and sour cherries, dusty strawberries, fresh and dried raspberries here. Just a hint, dare I use your word, soupçon of citrus peel in here, maybe something mandarin.
Hear about that later, yeah.
Or whatever. But then there's floral elements here. I'm picking up roses, I'm picking up hibiscus, I'm picking up carnations, hyacinth, both again fresh and dried, and I'm also getting a note of sort of a rustic, earthy, savory element. I'm probably not pushing it as far as meaty, but some inorganic earth elements too. And well, let's talk about the palate afterwards. What do you get?
Yeah, well, I really am enjoying the really cool botanical notes on the nose here. Things like juniper I'm picking up, and wildflowers, and I'm thinking of all these botanical spices and floral elements that are really gorgeous on the nose. It's really leaping out in the glass. I love that the wine doesn't feel heavy, although I feel like it's quite balanced. There's definitely some alcohol here, but it's balanced degree, and there's freshness to it, and there's there's really this buoyant character about this wine that really it speaks to me as something that's very crushable. Sorry to say that again, but really a really crushable wine, easy to appreciate and drink, but still with that aromatic complexity and that really great length.
Yeah, and having enough red fruit and all of those markers there to show it in sort of, comes off to me kind of, it's living between an old world and a new world style. Probably learn about that in a minute. And I like the fact that there's a roundness and a smoothness to it, but there is some tannin there and there's some grip in the mouth, although not in an unpleasant, astringent way, but yet it's smooth at the same time and has what appears to be sort of a lovely balance of weight. So all that in mind, I'm sure you're getting wonderful.
I'm going to let you do the reveal.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm going to watch the replay to see everybody's reaction.
Okay, and this wine is in fact from Chile. And this is a grape that if you're not super familiar with it, you're going to be hearing a lot more about it because it's becoming increasingly popular. And that is, of course, País. So with that said, I'm going to ask the gentleman and my friend, Derek Amos-Manap, and his wonderful wife, and actually probably the more talented of the two of them, Pilar, to join us and talk to us here. And I only wanted to facilitate the transition before Sara had to leave, because for those of you who don't know Derek either by in person or in a webinar or whatever, Derek's Canadian too. So that means that 2 of the 6 wines thus far have some tie to the Great North, which I think is kind of wild. But let's go back and let's talk a little bit, Derek, about Chile, and Pilar about Chile, about País, about this wine, and whatever. Go for it.
This wine is actually called the 215 BC ferment. But in this case, BC is not either British Columbia nor before Christ, but before Cabernet. So the original document that presents País in a section of Itata would have come in through Concepciones from 1548. If you've done your homework and studying for those exams, you would know that the first instance of documentation of Cabernet Sauvignon is from 1763. The difference between those two dates being 215 BC.
There you go.
Just to make that connection absolutely clear.
Absolutely. Yeah. So talk to us a little bit about País. There seems to be more and more increasing chatter about País. And País, as we know, is a great grape that clearly, to your point, has wonderful history, but it's being rethought, it's being rethunk, it's being re-imaged, if you will, in some ways, being brought back to the past in other ways. What can you tell us about this, and specifically about yours and Pilar's wine?
It's a tremendous revival going on. I think perhaps in part because there's a fantastic history. Of course, this comes across the ocean as raisins on the old Spanish colonial ships, and this was planted from seed, from raisins, and it actually formed a part of the homesteading of the south of Chile. So in Canada or the US, it would have been you farm the land and you build a home. We had a third condition for when you received the the deed of your property was you had to make wine for mass for the Catholic Church so they could continue their missions going south, which is kind of a wonderful way to think about it. And it is a terribly long time ago. I mean, if you think of what was going on in the late 1500s, I mean, there was a few settlements in Quebec to touch upon Canada one last time. But I mean, there wasn't a lot of anything going on in North America. And I think it represents a little bit of a change in focus in Chile away from the kind of the second wave of the French varieties coming into, a bourgeois late 1800s Chile versus something that's much older, the Spanish influence. And of course, we have the Cariñana and the Garnacha as well. This is a village wine, we would say. Most of what we do, which I thought was fun to put this in the event here. By the way, that was absolutely fascinating to have this group of people go at this blind, because we've done lots of tastings where you try and get people to talk, but they don't know the expertise of these people. And I literally started writing things down that I thought were absolutely fascinating. That was worth it before we even got a chance to do our spiel. So this is a village. We say single ferments. So these are 4 or 5, depending on the year. We're trying to get as many small producers, small farmers, to do at least something of their grapes that go into this wine, so that we're giving a bit of a lift or a boost. This is obviously a social issue of what's really being paid, because these are properties that They don't fill a truck. They're too far from a paved road. They were forgotten by kind of say the modern Chilean New World wine business. And it's just wonderful that small companies, many small companies, not just ours, in the neighborhood, start to produce wines from these and give a very needed lift, a very, you could say, revival to the community. There's some absolutely brilliant landscapes, and these are all untethered, ungrafted vines, many of them that are, 150, 200 years old. Most of the deeds, or most of the technical documents that go along with these don't have a planting date. It just says time immemorial. Want to jump in?
Yeah, Pilar, is he getting this right, by the way? Or
Come on. But speak.
Yeah, I was reading the comments. It's very interesting. How do you define the wine or the characteristic of aromas that you find? And there are two comments that said it's like a brunch wine. And I think in one way you're right. It's a balanced wine, but it's not quite strong. So it's a very friendly wine.
Mm-hmm. And to what do you collectively, aside from all the revival and it's great that this is your grape. Obviously so many people associate Carmenere or perhaps Cabernet as being, for their various reasons, the signatures of Chile. Yet this is really your grape. What are your thoughts as to its revival and its interpretation as to how we're seeing it play out in bottle and market today?
I think País is always been in Chile, and it's been forgotten for a while. With all the growers and where we're working now since 10 years, they always have País in their land. So they can have Cariñá, they can have a Grenache, they can have another varieties, but they always have País, and that is the one that they've been drinking for years. And I think you don't have to forget that. I think it's very representative of a Chile countryside. And it's I think if you work properly and you work gently with the grapes in the cellar, you can make a very nice wine. It doesn't have to be rustic or too wild. I think you can make a very nice wine, and wines maybe for a start lunch, or maybe you don't need something very special to eat. It could be very flexible wine. If you want to marry that with food, and in the end, it's part of the production unit that the growers have in their lands. They have some vegetables and other varieties, wheat, but also have this variety, and we don't have to lose it. We have to learn and work with them.
Yeah, go ahead, Derek.
There's kind of a 360-degree farming that goes on here. That imagine people, having never eaten kind of food from a freezer. And of course they have when they go to town and have a sandwich, but to their minds, they eat everything fresh, and they're very keen to those flavors. And that's a wonderful thing. You think that it almost sounds kind of like Dan Barber's kitchen, that, as some people are finally getting onto that, or the world returns to that. This is something that we have to maintain. We had two bubbles working through COVID that basically was a means of keeping a medium-sized group of people safe, because in the end the temptation was to get in a van, go further for a little more money. And of course, when you start mixing people from other towns, the risk goes up. So we made a wine called Revival. I'm not sure whether we'll get to the US, but in the end it was just kind of building on this, what's really needed to get even more rhythm.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're all, I think, collectively hopeful that this País revolution that frankly you and Pilar have led in no small part, it becomes even more apparent to all of us. I know that many of the delegates out there listening are not only supporters of yours, but supporters of the category. And whether they're white wines, whether they're pink wines, whether they're the red versions, whether they're influenced by sort of some of the more modern techniques brought in via Beaujolais years ago, or the more classic pipeño styles that we all know and love. I think it's a great story. I hope that it becomes a bigger story in time, and that we get, frankly, more and more exposure to it here up north, in our case, as opposed to down north from the Canadian case, simply because the wines are, as Pilar states, so food friendly, so vital, and obviously the connection to the people, to the culture, to the country, to the history is so profound in Chile.
The Pais to us, the ones that they drink in the neighborhood, are a little more like this, not age-worthy, but not quite so glue. I mean, they like a base note. You know, they love it when there's a little bit of something else to put in the blend. This is how do you say, they like the old timers enjoy it, and we like to make that wine. There's some wonderful lighter wines in that Beaujolais style that you say, but I think you have to be a little more. We're trying to be a little more true to the neighborhood.
Absolutely, and I think you succeed brilliantly. It's just a delightful wine, and thank you for sharing it with our delegation. And then you're gonna, yeah, go ahead.
No, thank you all. That was really wonderful. We'll stick around for questions.
You'll stick around afterwards again. For those of you, you have the epicenter of information. Anything you want to know about Pais, about the Secano in general, about what's going on there, the movements, these are the people to ask. So stick around. We'll ask you more questions at the end. But on that note, we're going to go move to wine number 5. So let's jump into this glass, everybody. And this is going to be slightly different. Again, there's sort of a continuity of style and extract and color across these 3 wines here. But as I'm looking at this wine as well too, it's once again sort of a pale light ruby color. It's got a little bit of a salmoning towards the edge, which suggests to me either a grape type or style or whatever in parallel with the color that might drop some color over time. I don't know, but not massive amounts of pigmentation, which is an interesting element here and worth pointing out. The first thing I noticed about the nose is sort of this dichotomy between being sort of at once delicate, at once sort of elegant, but also sort of boisterous. And there's sort of an easy, inviting character to the nose, which once again, not a big surprise by virtue of its appearance, is again a red fruited dominant wine. I'm picking up some notes of strawberry, cherry, a little bit of watermelon, I might add. Again, sort of a citrusy element, maybe not quite as ripe, maybe more in that sort of tangerine vein or mandarin vein. Definitely floral pieces here. A little bit of sort of a rose hip or lavender element, balanced, very nice sort of place between the red fruit, the floral elements, and then there's sort of an herbal, again, character here. But what I would describe the herbals here are not so much, go up and pick up your whole spice or your McCormick's and put it in front of your nose, and that's what marjoram smells like, that's what rosemary smells like. Here I'm getting a freshness to it, but almost like a wildness of freshness. So for those of you who grow herbs in your backyard or on a farm or on your balcony or whatever, there's a big difference that when the flowers come out of those, you get those sort of floral herbs, thinking of rosemary flowers, of thyme flowers and stuff like that. And that's the kind of herb character I'm getting here. Not so much dried, classic, whatever, but sort of this wild, fresh herb character to it. If there is oak here, it's relatively seamless. And not a big piece. And in the mouth, wine's nice and medium in body, well balanced. There's again some tannins, but the tannins are well managed, not grippy, not pulling, but nevertheless there to provide structure. There's again a purity of expression, which once again suggests to me, again in the context of red wines, suggests a monovarietal grape there. Excellent acidity. Once again, sort of this beautiful current of sharpness behind the wine that sort of elevates the flavors. The texture itself is relatively velvety, somewhat creamy, but they're again pushed forward by this vibrance and this zestiness of its acidity when coupled with the fruit shows a wine that is not high volume, but nevertheless high expression for what it's doing. So I think a lot of you probably are starting to get in your head. Some of you might be nodding as I got this one nailed, Evan. I think I'm fine. I think I know exactly what it is. I think I know exactly where it's from, in which case you would tell me Argentina. Now, this might be a little bit of a surprise when you think about what we're going to learn about next and what the wine is. So this is actually a Garnacha or a Grenache, which some people associate obviously with France, obviously with Spain, maybe somewhat in South America, and even maybe within Argentina. But if you're in Argentina and you're thinking Grenache, I can promise you you're not thinking of Salta. And I can promise you you're not thinking of Cafajate. And this wine is, in fact, a pure play Garnacha from 5,900 feet on the south side in Tolombon in Cafajate, and on the eastern slope to the Calchaquis. And a very interesting soil type. Interesting stones and all of that. But rather than hear from me, we're very fortunate to have with us today a tremendous winemaker and a dear friend, Alejandro. We call him Colo. Colo is sort of like ginger or redhead in the local. Sejanovic here. And Alejandro or Colo, if you want to join us and talk to us a little bit about Estancia Los Cordones. Talk to us a little bit about what motivated you, being the literally only, as far as I know, vineyard holdings of Grenache in Salta, to do so in an area that we associate with Malbec and Cabernet.
Hi, Evan, and everybody. I was always motivated to plant Grenache in Argentina because it's a variety that grows very well in warmer areas, in dry areas, and especially Tolombon is an extremely dry, warm, during the day, warm temperatures and very cold nights. And the floor of this vineyard is a soil that is full of stones and make me remember Châteauneuf-du-Pape. So when I first visited these vineyards in 2010 and I began this project in 2010, the growers, they have more land to plant. So I suggest to plant Garnacha. So in 2011, they planted this variety, and after some years, I began bottling it. And truly, it's for me a challenge. It was a challenge. Here you can see in the pictures the stones of the vineyard and the facility that is all built in stones, in the same stones of the soil. Here in the north of Argentina, most of the wines, they used to be rich and powerful. And for me, the challenge here was to produce wines with the elegance in the north. So I not only did with the Malbec, but begin this variety, the Garnacha. Especially the challenge was to show a wine with almost no color. Mostly of the wines of Salta, they are extremely rich in color. We have their Malbec, Tanat. They are extremely rich because of elevation, because of very intense sunlight. So also here in the picture, you can see the mountains that they are extremely dry. The rain is almost nothing here. Of course, the vineyard is irrigated. And well, I love the wines of Garnacha, not only from France, but especially from high elevation vineyards in Madrid. And well, I like this kind of style where I like to make wines to drink that they will match very well with a lot of kind of food. And well, I think this is the new style of wines that people is looking, especially in gastronomy now. I mean, wines that they match food.
Mm-hmm. Talk to us a little bit, Alejandro, about, have obviously the world has taken note, and I've seen some lovely write-ups about this wine in various publications. Have you spurned a new movement? Are your neighbors paying attention to what's going on, or are you still out there waving the Garnacha flag by yourself? Are there other people in Salta doing it? Have people further south in, say, Mendoza or San Juan taken note? What do we think of the future of Garnacha in your part of the world?
Yeah, there are a few plantations of Garnacha in Mendoza, in Los Chacalles. There is a very nice Garnacha of Bersacrum, and other growers also. Some small growers are planting and vinifying Garnacha. Consumers, they are looking for this kind of wines. They love to have wines that they are fresh, easy to drink, and not so much concentration like powerful, rich, full of oak Malbecs. So this is great.
Yeah. So talk to us a little bit. I mean, obviously, most people's familiarity with Garnacha is from other places, and none of them have the altitude that you have there in Salta. Can you talk to us about the opportunities, but also some of the potential challenges one has with this variety at such a high altitude in terms of whether it's pigment or whether it's the way that the flavors develop. What's your own experience been in working with a grape that you know so well that you recommended from your own experiences in the Rhone and other places, and how it's manifesting itself in Salta?
Well, what I like of the genetics of the population we have of Garnacha, which is not a colored Garnacha. This Garnacha, usually you find the clusters with some they have color, some they don't. And I like to vinify everything together without and with color. And you have this change of flavors and acidity depending the bunch. The bunch are very different, and that's good. And also I like to vinify at least 10% with whole cluster. So here there is some stems inside, and vinification, what I do is begin the vinification, and usually I take out the wine from the skins during fermentation. So to decrease the tannins, because tannins can be very powerful in this elevation. So what I feel that the Garnacha loves here, sunlight intensity, very cold nights, and also this place, it is very windy. So normally after 2 p.m., you have winds from 2 till 6 p.m. that refresh all the time. And well, it's an amazing variety, and it's showing a beautiful wine that we are having from the first launch we did in Argentina. We have an amazing success of this wine.
Yeah, and I think it's, from what I understand from your importer, it's on allocation now too. It's hard to get, and you can no longer even find it on their website. So thank you so much for sharing that with us today. Again, Alejandro will stick around during the Q&A period that follows, but I think that hits both unexpected and once again a gem of a wine. Thank you, Alejandro, for being with us. All right, we're going to move on to our last wine. Last but not least, we're going to move to wine number 6. And here we get another wine. And this is an interesting wine because it seems to be sort of a bit of a tweener. The color itself is sort of light, it's translucent. It's more of a deep rosé, I would say, in my mind's eye, in terms of how I would describe it, than being a red. There's a stark brightness to the wine that suggests, again, more of a rosé than a red, and soft pink edge there. And it reminds me from a color standpoint, interesting for those of you who were coming from our session yesterday, Clink Different, when we had a rosé from Bordeaux, that this has, if you remember that category of Bordelais rosés called Claret, C-L-A-R-E-T, which is sort of a deeper, darker rosé that's not a red, but it's not a classic rosé. This color to me reminds me a bit of that. In the nose, I'm getting a wonderful combination of again, sort of bright red fruit characters, a lot of cherry, red currants and red plums, but also some things that are not. So there's more like cherry tomatoes in here. And I'm reminded also, I had to look it up online because I think what they call those sweet cherry peppers. So it's actually part of the pepper family. I know that people used to put them in their kids' lunches. Some of them are hot, some of them are green, some of them are spices, but the sweet ones reminds me a little bit of this. And then from the personality of a wine standpoint, I was asking myself, if I didn't know what this was, obviously I know what it is, but you know, it's kind of Pinot, kind of Grenache, kind of Dolcetto, kind of Gamay, yet at the same time, none of the above. I mean, it really is a distinctive, different wine. The palate, again, shows those notes of cherry, maybe a little bit more cranberry in the mouth, maybe a touch of pomegranate, but also, again, sort of more of an earthiness or a savory character. I pick up on just this hint of, I call it almost like a salinity that you're getting, kind of like green olive or sea, a little bit of touch of soft sea, red licorice, and then the palate is just sort of smooth as silk, cherry, 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 but finishes herbal, finishes a little bit spicy, if I can say so. Tannins are quite moderate. The wine is round, but what's interesting to me about this wine in finishing my descriptor before we describe what it is and where we're from, is that it's actually deceptively very long. So if you're finishing it and you're listening to me talk here, you can still taste it. There's a sort of very nuanced finish. It's actually somewhat expansive in it, and it's quite interesting. And it's a different grape. And it's, like I said, it ain't Dolcetto, it ain't Gamay, but what is it? What could it be? Where could it be from? Well, I'm delighted to tell you now. We're finishing up here today in Turkey. So for those of you who've not had a lot of Turkish wine, or perhaps any Turkish wine, I'd like to welcome you to the land of Karasakis, primarily, a little kiss of Merlot, and specifically to the area of the Aegean. So again, you were picking up on that salinity and stuff like that. You're not super far away from the water. I myself have been not only to this property, but to this region. I've had lunch with Seyit, who is going to join us now, and is just a lovely man, and is a champion as well too of the native varieties. I mean, one of the challenges I found in one of the debates I had when I was in Turkey several years ago was this fact that they take their local varieties for granted, be it Okuskusu, Kalachikarasi, etc. And they think that they're, you know, many of the vintners there are happier to show you their take on Syrah, or instead of showing you Emir or Narinche and whites, they're happier to show you their take on Chardonnay. But I know that Seyit is a big advocate of the native grapes. He spent a lot of time as an importer, as you'll see on the slide. He's a good friend of many of our friends, Mark de Grazia. So he has an international approach here, but he has this commitment to the local varieties. So Seyit, if you could join us, and what can you tell us about the Karasakis? What can you tell us about your region, your style, and everything you're doing? And welcome from Turkey, and thank you for staying up so late.
Good evening, everyone, or good morning, good day, wherever you are. I'm Seyit Karagözoğlu. I'm the founder of Paşeli Winery. Karasakis variety, it comes from Kaz Dağları, which is in the northern part of the Aegean region of Turkey. Kaz Dağları is actually a national park, and it's an area that is, you know, very well known in history. It's very close to the ancient city of Troy. It's according to the Greek mythology where Zeus resides. It's the mountain of goddess Kybele. And the viticulture area lies just to the north of the national park, yeah, exactly. And the vineyards tend to be from 300 meters to 600 meters. We are at 500 meters. This is our Old Wines vineyard, and they tend to face south. So we are facing, what you see there is the peak of the national park, which is some 1,000+ meters. And on the left-hand side on the map, you see Kaz Dağları. This is where we are. So we are close to the Aegean Sea, but a little inland. And in this area, it's, you know, there are 3 native varieties: Karasakis, Sıdalan, and Çakal. Çakal is almost extinct. We're the only winery in the world that makes wine with Çakal. We're trying to save it by replanting it in our vineyard. Our Karasakis. Well, also let me tell you a little about the soil. It's, you know, it's old volcanic soil, mineral soil, and there are certain. It's you know, soil is granite. There are stones and rocks, but also sandy soil. Karasakis is a thin-skinned variety. And the wine that we make is coming partially from this vineyard that you see on the picture. It's 35+ years old, you know, freestanding goblet style. And the neighboring vineyards, they tend to be younger, but when I say younger, they are average 20 years, 25 years old. Thin-skinned variety, we fermented in stainless steel tanks, and we fermented with native yeast, 100% unless it's a rainy year. It's hand-picked stainless steel fermentation, partially barrel aged up to 6 months, French oak and American oak, but we like to use 2 years old, 3 years old barrels because the fruit is delicate and we don't want to have too much oak. Yeah, that's, you can see the stones and the rocks. And the other pictures, it's Andrea and I. Andrea Pauletti is our consultant from Tuscany, whom we've been working with since day one. You know, back in 2000 when we started. So it's been a collaboration of 21 years. The picture was taken back in February 2020, just before COVID hit. And yeah, so
Say it, tell us, I think even those of us who are familiar with Turkish grape varieties, this is a new one. We're familiar with the couscousu, boğaziçi,
Yes.
Karachi Karasi, but is this a relatively rare grape? Is it simply a function of where we were? I know in doing some reading, historically, a lot of this used to be distilled as well too, and not necessarily made into a table wine. So what can you tell us about the
Yes.
grape?
I mean, this when we had a state monopoly, this was used for brandy production. But there are two types of Karasakas. There are the bigger clusters, tighter clusters, low color, low alcohol. This is used in the brandy, and ours is the older, let's say, older type of Karasakas, smaller clusters, more concentrated fruit. But this variety was always overlooked because it did not have enough color. So the big wineries, when they were buying the fruit, they wanted something that had more of a body for their blends. And in Turkey, we tend to like this bigger style of wines. For many Turks, a good wine is what they call a gabardet, Cabernet Sauvignon. But I thought, as a wine importer, I knew how popular are these thin-skinned varieties. They tend to be very, very elegant, and I was like, listen, this is overlooked. We need to work on a variety like this, and this is something we can export. And it turns out, after many years, I was correct, and we are exporting a lot of Karasakas now. And others are jumping in and making wines from Karasakas. In the beginning, we were the first winery to make 100% or 80%, 90% Karasakas, and people were like, what is this? This is is this rosé? Well, what is this?
It's a delightful. It's a delightful wine, and I was pleased. And you and I actually were chatting about this last week. That in San Francisco, where I live, there was a review of sort of like, if you're into wine and you're into trying different wines, here's where you have to go. And it's a restaurant/wine bar, retail store, located not actually too far away from where I live. And it's Turkish owned. The chef owner is Turkish and makes great food. And he always has a Turkish wine by the glass. And he highlighted, this is what I'm pouring. He's pouring this particular wine by the glass right now in his restaurant, exposing more and more people to Turkish wines, into this Karasakish variety. And he told me that the reception that he's had to it has been nothing short of outstanding. And people are more and more
glad to hear.
It's probably the biggest account.
both Emrah and Ayça, husband and wife, they are, I think they are cooking the best Turkish food available in the US. And they have a good wines from all over the world. But I'm glad they're supporting our Karasakas.
They've been great proponents for Turkish wine. For those of you who are sitting here going, what the hell are they talking about? This would be Kitchen Istanbul in San Francisco's Inner Richmond neighborhood. If you do go there and they don't know who you are, say it and Evan sent you, right?
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much, Sayed. And at this point, my pleasure. We're gonna open it up now and just sort of run into some Q&A. Li Meng, I'm gonna ask you to join me back now and help us with any questions that you have and facilitating that. And I think that just based on our timing and everything, what I'm gonna do really quickly is just run through. I'm going to go backwards. So I'm going to actually run through my thank you slide first, and then we're going to go back to the Q&A and open it up for everybody. But needless to say, in advance, huge thanks to our speakers, to our panelists, to the sponsors of this incredible, always educational and delicious session. Please remember to submit your evaluation as soon as possible on the bit.ly unexpected_eval thing. And we're going to be doing some connecting, some discussions. Again, all of our vintner friends have been gracious enough to stick on the line. And if you have any questions about Zweigelt Rosé, Karasakish, Grenache in Salta, País in the Secano Interior of Chile, now is the opportunity for you to ask. So feel free. We're going to open it up. Li Meng's going to jump on here, moderate it. And then once again, if you feel like showing yourself, cool. If you don't, if you just want to answer questions, ask live or whatever, cool too. And with that, Li Meng, I'm going to throw it over to you.
I'm gonna start with Saeed. You answered this question. I think it's a bigger discussion for everybody. Doug had a great question in the chat that said, I thought Islamic countries don't drink, so Turks drink wine. And you answered many Turks drink, which is great, but can you give a little bit more contextually, what is the industry like in Turkey?
Yeah, well, some Turks drink, some Turks don't drink. But number one reason why many Turks don't drink is economically. They cannot afford to buy alcoholic beverages. We are very highly taxed by the government, so therefore, wine or spirits are expensive. But some surely do not drink because they are conservative. Especially, if you go towards the eastern part of the country, people tend to become more conservative. But those on the west tend to be more open-minded because don't forget, Turkey is a country that receives over 35 million tourists a year. So those Turks that live in the western part of the country and they are used to seeing tourists, they drink. They're more let's say more open-minded, more secular. And in regards to the industry, of course, in the local market, consumption per capita is less than a liter, so 0.7 liters. An average Turk is drinking less than a bottle of wine. But there are, I suppose, around 150 wineries that are licensed by the government. And keep in mind, we are very heavily controlled by the government. There are constantly controllers in the companies checking our books and stocks and tanks and barrels and etc. But I mean, as I said, there are 150 plus wineries. About, I would say, 20 of them are exporting, and we're trying to export more and more. And I suppose in the next 10 years, the world will be seeing more of Turkish wines because, also the Turkish consumers are discovering our own grapes. Mm-hmm. 20 years ago, they wanted to drink Cabernet Sauvignon because they thought this was the cool thing to drink. And 20 years ago, 10 years ago, it was very difficult for us to sell Karasakas. And some people said, this is not wine, this is something else. But now people are beginning to appreciate what Karasakas is or varieties like that. And I think there is a movement that producers, consumers are looking for these indigenous varieties. So in that sense, we are going in the right direction. Maybe the country is going in the wrong direction politically, but the industry is with all the difficulties trying to go in the right direction.
Yeah, great, thank you. And just a follow-up, are spirits also made in Turkey?
Yes. The biggest one is rakı, is like pastis, or is like ouzo, grape distillation with aniseed. It's the biggest. It's the locals call it lion's milk. You mix it with water, and so it turns white. 45% alcohol. Sure, I mean that's the most popular drink. Everybody's drinking it.
Great. Thank you very much for that. Evan, can I trouble you to put slide number wine number 4 back up on the PowerPoint? Okay. If you can. I can figure out how to do that. There was a pricing question on wine number 4, which I believe was Derek's wine, okay. Derek and Pilar's wine. All right. As people are leaving, if the vintners are going to stay, that's great. For those of you who are leaving, thank you so much for being here for today's session. Tomorrow, we have a session with Remy Wine Cellars at 10 o'clock. So I hope to see everybody there. And for those who are asking why you didn't get this kit, we just have so many requests from so many folks who wanted all the different kits. And so we try to, put it out as many different places as we can, but there are very, very few. There might be singles or certain wines left, and I will do my best if you didn't get a kit and want to try something from here, or if you have a favorite, put your name down in the survey and we will try to get it for you. There is a question here on where to see the tech sheets. The tech sheets are sent to you in an email, but they're also already in the overview document that you got with the calendar invite for this particular session.
And
so
those will be live now that the tasting is over. We didn't want to preload them to give away the blind tasting, but if you go back to that link now or sometime later today, they will be uploaded.
Great, thank you. Any other questions, folks who are on? Was this a fun way to reveal? Obviously, with Master the World, we love doing things blind. What do you guys think?